Anybody can read the Zionist literature, and you'll find that Israel is an expansionist project. It is not just about the territory of Palestine, but also the ambitions extend to Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, even parts of Egypt and Jordan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. Israel has spread its Gaza genocide into Lebanon over the last month, with the full backing of the U.S., killing over 2,000 people and displacing 1.2 million, a fifth of the country, all in an effort to weaken Hezbollah and any resistance to its hegemony across the region. While this is a war on all of Lebanon, the Israelis are specifically attacking Lebanon's Shia community, going so far as to hunt and kill the displaced in airstrikes on supposedly safe areas, while attempting a ground invasion in the south. While Israel tries to weaken Hezbollah militarily, the U.S. is working to pressure the country politically to push out Hezbollah in what some are referring to as a regime change scheme. But so far, it seems they've bit off more than they can chew. Despite huge losses and the elimination of its entire senior military leadership, Hezbollah has demonstrated it's still a force to be reckoned with. As catastrophe spreads across Lebanon with no end in sight, many are perplexed by the country's politics, divisions, and potential for civil war. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Lebanese medical doctor, public health researcher, and political analyst Anis Germani. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Anis, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rania. It's good to be here.
So you are speaking to me from Lebanon, and obviously things have escalated, deteriorated. A lot has happened since I've last had you on. In fact, I believe most of the times I've had you on, it's been to talk about the health catastrophe in Gaza. So as Israel has expanded this war in Lebanon, I think for the last year, many people have been watching the horrific genocide in Gaza, and they've learned a lot about Palestine, about the history of Israel's settler colonialism, about the history of Gaza, of the West Bank, the Nakba in 1948 and everything that took place after that. But now that we are discussing the issue of Israel carpet bombing and essentially trying to invade the country of Lebanon, which is not occupied territory, it's a UN recognized sovereign country. Many people are left a little bit confused because Lebanon seems like a much more complicated situation. It has a much different political structure. So a lot is different, but there are some similarities when it comes to Israel's aggression towards Palestine. So all that's to say, I think what's important about this episode that we're doing today is to kind of give people, English speakers, a framing and a way to understand this country of Lebanon, its history with the Israelis, Lebanon's political system, the U.S. interference in Lebanon, as well as other countries, and how that plays in to everything we're seeing today. And I know that sounds like a mouthful and it sounds complicated, but it's actually not that complicated. So let's jump right into it and start with the basics of what we're seeing take place now. And I want to start with the issue of U.S. interference in Lebanese politics to weaken Hezbollah at this point in time. We know that the Israelis have gone on this killing spree to essentially weaken Hezbollah militarily. While they're doing that, the U.S. is attempting to weaken Hezbollah politically. They've been actively involved in Lebanese politics with the aim of weakening Hezbollah all this time, but they're intensifying their efforts at a moment when they think Hezbollah is weak. And they're trying to install a president to try to push Hezbollah out of political office, which they serve in Lebanon. So let's start there. Let's start with what is the U.S. attempting to do right now? And maybe that kind of can segue into an overview, a very simple overview of the Lebanese political system, because it's important to understand that, to understand how this foreign interference works.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the simpler things. First of all, I completely understand why people would be it would be easier to understand what's happening in Palestine, the political climate there, because Israel has completely eradicated the political climate. So there's no room for complexity that is natural to all systems. So contrary to Palestine, Lebanon has a bustling, complicated political life like any other country. And for the past 3 or 4 weeks, Israel has been continuously carpet bombing Lebanon. So far, there's been 1.2 million people that have been displaced and 2,300 people that have been martyred. So in this context, there's been a certain development over the past year that has been happening in an insidious way. That is that the U.S. has made a decision with Israel to shift, the tactic into a tactic of regime change and not just of genocide in Palestine and all-out war in the region. So it started around October 17th with the pager attack, and then things started to escalate very quickly. September, yes. So then things started to escalate very quickly. So first they targeted, with the pager attack, they targeted approximately 4,000 people from Hezbollah. Then they started doing a series of assassinations that killed people from the leadership of Hezbollah. Then they started carpet bombing Lebanon, especially in the Bekaa, the south, and the southern suburb of Beirut, and other places across Lebanese territory, but more sporadically. And then the key point is that at some point this week, they started targeting political figures of Hezbollah, people that are not fighters, people that do not have anything to do with the military branch of Hezbollah. As people, I assume, already know, Hezbollah it was born a military resistance. However, over the years, especially after the year 2000 and 2005 specifically, they integrated Lebanese political life. So they are a party with ministers, with MPs. They hold cabinets. They discuss and have political agreements and disagreements like any other normal party. So at some point, the rhetoric also changed. So we started hearing about something very reminiscent of the years leading up, the few months actually leading up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. We're talking now about a new Middle East. Jared Kushner posted like a long tweet where he said that the Middle East is a rigid thing that is now liquid, and because it is liquid, we can change that. Amos Hochstein also echoed the same the same conviction. These are, of course, very Orientalist tropes, thinking that, this backward area of the Middle East is something that is rigid and must be broken into something better. And it is exactly the same thing that happened in Iraq in 2003. It is demagogy, to the point of stupidity, the point of them looking at a region in the same way. And despite all of the failures that happened as a consequence of the invasion of Iraq in 2003, they are replicating the same thing today, which shows that, first of all, they're not very imaginative, but also very stupid, because they still do not acknowledge the failures and the catastrophic consequences of 2003. If we reread the literature of the days leading up to the Iraqi invasion, these people, the U.S. administration at the time, they truly believed if they went into Iraq, destroyed everything, and then built everything based on the most liberal policies ever, then it would send shockwaves across the region, and then people will be so happy to look at Iraq and they'll be jealous, and then they're going to call for the US to come into their country and then impose the same thing on them. In retrospect, we see how insane this is, and now they're doing it again. So obviously, no lessons learned from ISIS, from the millions of people that died in Iraq, from Syria, from Libya. No lessons whatsoever, and these consequences that were not limited to the Middle East. The terror attacks that happened across Europe, the militarism that happened across Western democracies. All of these were consequences of the attack in the Middle East in 2003. So I don't know what they're trying to do here, but it seems something very similar to that era, and the consequences this time will be far worse, because this is not the Middle East is not the Middle East of 2003. Neither is Lebanon, neither is Iraq, neither is Syria, neither is Libya, neither is Iran, and more importantly, neither is Israel.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make about the fact that, and it's not just Jared Kushner, it's people in the Biden administration. Like you said, we're hearing this rhetoric of this is our chance to reshape the Middle East. It reminds you of
Hochstein is part of the Biden administration.
Right,
so it's
exactly.
across the political aisle in the U.S.
Exactly. And I want to play, speaking of Hochstein. So Hochstein is the Biden appointed special envoy to the Middle East, who is also Israeli. So that's just like, think about that. The fact that the Biden administration has appointed somebody who served in the Israeli army, who's also American, to be the point person, the intermediary between Israel and Lebanon, because they don't have official communications. And so Hochstein recently said something on an interview with the Lebanese outlet LBC, which I just want to play real quick. It's a very short clip. And I think it's important just because there's a bit of a Freudian slip here. Maybe not so much a Freudian slip, but here it is.
And at the same time, have a new government once Lebanon selects a president, have a new government that could address the critical needs of the country.
I don't know. Just in case nobody caught that, I'm going to play that one more time. Just listen to what he just said.
And at the same time, have a new government once Lebanon selects a president, have a new government that could address the critical needs of the country.
So once Lebanon selects a new president, and it seems a little bit funny, but that's not a joke, right? And this is where I'm talking about with the U.S. interference right now is people are hearing the U.S. wants Lebanon to select a president, and Lebanon should select a president. Obviously, Lebanon hasn't had a president for a couple of years now because of political deadlock. And so can you just kind of break down in very simple terms the Lebanese political system in terms of like, you kind of, if we want to really simplify it, you kind of have two sides. You have a pro-resistance side, and I mean, I'm using that very loosely, and you have an anti-resistance kind of pro-US side. So explain who's who in there, and where does the idea of president fit in?
So I'm going to complexify, if that's even a word, things a bit more.
Oh gosh, Anis, why do you have to do that? Why do you have to complexify? I'm just joking, please. It is a bit more,
yeah. So because you'll find these two groups that either agree or disagree on who they like and who they hate. They might coalesce on a lot of things and then separate again. So there's more to it than that. So first, Lebanon is something that can be described as a sectarian, consensual kind of arrangement. It was born out of two things. First, the French colonial era on Lebanon, where they favored to deal with sectarian groups and sideline political groups. And second, from the Civil War that stretched out from 1975 till 1991 in Lebanon. And in this period, a group of people that were fighting, basically warlords, the ones who came out victorious out of the Civil War, were the ones that remained. And then they signed something called the Ta'if Agreement that organized their relationship together by compartmentalizing the state. So basically, everybody agreed to let go of their weapons in exchange to take a parcel out of the state. And from this was born, the contemporary Lebanese state, its government, and how it functions. So, in effect, there's around 6 sectarian leaders in Lebanon. They do not have the same amount of power, but in terms of domestic decision making, everybody has veto power. Whether they represent 10,000 people or 2 million people, everybody has veto power because they want to, safeguard the conviviality between sects. This is the argument that is given, and sometimes some of them derive power from each other. So you will find that in recent years, Hezbollah became, because of its power, first the sheer size of its supporters, and then of course its military wing. Hezbollah became a pillar of Lebanese political life, not just any other player. So from Hezbollah, there was Saad al-Hariri, who is from the opponent camp and is somebody that is actively, openly supported by Saudi Arabia, was deriving his power from Hezbollah. On the other end, you have people from the Free Patriotic Movement, that is the Michel Aoun party, the ex-president of Lebanon, that has, his term had ended 2 years ago. They were also deriving power from him. Both of these parties barely exist anymore. So nobody talks about them anymore because they have collapsed as a consequence of the 2019 crisis. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the second most powerful party in Lebanon are the Lebanese forces. This is an offshoot of the Phalangist group, which is like a right-wing Christian militia that started off in the civil war. They are led by Samir Jaja, and they are openly also supported by the US, by the Gulf countries, and they have an openly hostile position towards Hezbollah. And from him as well, other people derive their power. Most of them try to label themselves as independent people, but however, they always end up in the same box on the same policy discourse. However, this is not the issue. The complexity comes in on domestic issues. So we have a parliament, we have a government, a president, prime minister. All of these posts exist. However, they are the scene on which the act is played, but it is not where the script is written. So the 6 sectarian leaders, plus here left and right, they gather privately, decide what they want to do privately, and then they expose their decisions in a form of statecraft. So at some point they hold some kind of elections, but the real decision happens somewhere else in the background. So this is why a lot of positions, you'll find them to be practically irrelevant in Lebanon. So for example, in the last 30 years, half of the 30 years, so 15 years of those 30, we've had caretaker governments. Nothing happened. Lebanon has always functioned, Presidents, are not elected for a year, 2 years, doesn't change anything. And especially the position of the presidency itself, even though the Americans today are putting a lot of focus onto it, you'll find that it has absolutely no prerogatives. It's not like the Lebanese system, even if you apply it by the book, by the laws, you'll find that the president doesn't have that many prerogatives. It's not like a US president. They don't command the army, they don't have executive power. They just ratify a few laws and that's about it. And then even if they don't ratify the laws, they pass by default within 15 days. So the president is more of a symbolic position. However, they found that today the Americans and the pro-American camp in Lebanon found that it's a good place to try to squeeze Hezbollah. So if they are able to appoint a president that is openly anti-Hezbollah, it would symbolize the defeat politically of Hezbollah. So this is why they're only giving it so much attention. But truly, nothing will change even if they appoint a president or even the best president on earth. It's not going to change anything because the constitution of the system doesn't cater to a president in Lebanon.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, you start to think that, okay, like maybe because what the Americans are doing right now is they're saying, well, we're not even going to discuss a ceasefire until you form a government, and you can't form a government until you pick a president. So it's also like in a way buying time for Israel to continue its military campaign against Hezbollah. So
yes, and something else as well, Rania, if I may interject quickly.
Yeah.
It is a way to buy time as well, but they're also convinced that Hezbollah is at its weakest. So
right.
Even they're trying to force these things, like to set them down in stone, this new balance of power in Lebanon, so that just in case Hezbollah, tries to improve its military position, which it has already done, by the way, then at least there would be something on the domestic front that is set in stone, that is pro-American, and it is comfortable for Israel and the Americans. So it's not just buying time, but it's also trying to cement a quick victory, because this is how they function. Always shock and awe, cement something and move on.
Right. And of course, we're seeing that Hezbollah has not been defeated, not even close. They definitely have experienced some serious blows, but they're adjusting quite quickly. And we can get to that. But to the issue of everything we're talking about in the context of Lebanon, all of this political maneuvering by these different parties domestically is happening in the context of the constant threat of war. And it's not just a threat of war. By Israel, this has happened before. And it has also happened in the context of Israel, the US, and its Western partners fomenting civil war as well. So I want to talk a little bit here about the historical context of Israel's aggression against Lebanon, because it's been ongoing really since Israel's founding. And I know, we have to, it would take hours to go through everything Israel's ever done to Lebanon. But I'm wondering if you could just kind of give a brief overview of the kind of like historical timeline, if you will, and the main points of Israel's aggressive behavior towards Lebanon, its agenda with Lebanon. And of course, it's always been a proxy of the U.S. in that context. But over the last 76 years that Israel's been occupying Palestine, it has had consequences on Lebanon and then also led to wars in Lebanon. So I guess, can you walk us through the most important times to understand about that?
Yeah. So first I'm going to start with the theoretical part and then jump to the practical. So the thing about settler colonialism in general is that it disrupts the entire region in which it settles. It is not just a question, it does not respect borders, especially when expansionism is entrenched in its ideology. So I'm not going to go into all of the details, but anybody can read the Zionist literature. And you'll find that Israel is an expansionist project. It is not just about the territory of Palestine, but also the ambitions extend to Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, even parts of Egypt and Jordan. So the first thing to do with this is that when you start to settle a certain area and you openly declare to everyone that you are here to take parts of their countries, and then your own core ideology is based on the identity of Jewishness, then automatically all the players around you have to reconfigure themselves. And they reconfigure themselves in a way to antagonize this project, which is on a sectarian basis. So because they claim to be representatives of the Jews, then automatically the others will have to position themselves as being representatives of the Christians, of the Muslims, of the Shia, Sunnis, and the Druze, and all of the details that come with it. So in a way, this reconfiguration of the region and of Lebanon specifically, because Lebanon shares borders with this colonial project, the interactions between the two cannot be avoided. So the idea that you can just ignore it's impossible, because one, the colonial entity is telling you, I'm coming to get you, and on the other hand, you share borders with them, so you cannot but respond. On the other hand, the history of Israel with Lebanon starts with violence. 1948, there's something called the Hula massacre in South Lebanon. Israel massacres people in south of Lebanon. This is the very beginning. They came in, started massacring people. And then 78, they come in to land incursion into Lebanon. This is when UNIFIL was founded for the first time in world history to force Israel out of Lebanon, and they deployed peacekeeping forces to make sure that they leave the country. They didn't do that, by the way. In 82, then during the civil war, they invade Lebanon again, and this time they came in to stay. So they also said something very similar to today. We're going to do a quick land incursion in Lebanon that's going to last 48 hours. They ended up staying for 18 years. And then it was the resistance that kicked them out in the year 2000. And then again, in 2006, they started a second war. And today, here we are again. This is a very brief, overview of our history with Israel. But it is all of the events somehow always revolve around violence. I mean, if there was another option, I would have cited at least, at some point they, sent aid to somebody, or we had some kind of agreement or trade or anything. No, always violence. Invasions, massacres, crimes, bombs, assassinations. That's all Israel knows how to do in its environment, and Lebanon is one of them.
That's really, really important to understand. And then I want you to elaborate a little bit on some of the specifics of specifically, they've invaded repeatedly, but specifically 1982, there are a lot of similarities and then many, many differences. But before we get to what's different today, from 82 and from 2006, I want to talk about some similarities, because like you were talking about earlier, there's not the imperialists lack creativity. So they tend to, rinse and repeat, recycle their old scripts. And so we're seeing some similarities in what the Israelis are suggesting they want to do and what they're actually trying to do today with the help of the Americans. One of them is in the presidency. The idea of appointing a president that will be pro-U.S., maybe even pro-Israel, and using that to somehow force Lebanon to normalize with Israel and get rid of resistance. That's been tried before. So I want you to kind of explain what happened in 1982 when they tried to do that. And then also I want to talk about the SLA. Because during the occupation of southern Lebanon, the Israelis armed and trained this proxy force called the South Lebanon Army, which was essentially made up of Lebanese forces partisans, if we're being honest. And they basically carried out the Israeli occupation, torture, imprisonment of their fellow Lebanese in the south, so Israel could have its way with that area of the country. And now today we see that Israel's opposition leader, the supposedly liberal, Yair Lapid, he wrote this op-ed in The Economist calling for basically the recreation of that Israeli proxy South Lebanon army. But he calls for doing it in a way that is that basically bribes Lebanese people to join it. by paying them, I think what did he offer? $500 a month?
$500. Yep.
$500 a month to basically be in a South Lebanon army proxy force.
That's a bit cheap, I have to say.
It is a bit cheap, right? Like, wow.
Yeah.
Clearly, he hasn't made up for inflation since 1982. But also in that, he also calls for basically dismantling the Lebanese government and handing it over to like some sort of international mandate. And we hear this from the Israelis, by the way, is trying to claim that Lebanon's not actually a country. It's a fake country, just more projection from an actual like fake settler colony. But anyways, I'm curious if you could make parallels to those 2 points. One, what happened when they tried to appoint a pro-Israel president during Lebanon's civil war in the past? And two, what was the South Lebanon army, and why should we be cringing at the fact that they're trying to resurrect that?
Mm-hmm. So the similarities between the what's happening today and 1982 is a parallelism that is being pushed forward, because these two epochs do not look alike at all. There's a lot of differences. However, there is some kind of interest in pushing for this narrative, and the most obvious one is because they want to make sure that Israel looks like it's about to win, which today is not guaranteed at all. So because they're saying that just like you lost the war in 1982 and Israel invaded and occupied South Lebanon for 18 years, something similar is going to happen. The points of similarities are many. The first one is the one that I mentioned earlier, that last time Israel promised it's going to go into limited land incursions into Lebanon. It ended up occupying Lebanon. Second, this time around, Israel has amassed a huge army on the south border. So in 1982, it was approximately between 60 to 80,000. This time it's between 80 and 100,000 soldiers that are amassed at the southern border. And this is, by the way, one of the largest armies in contemporary Middle Eastern history. And then third, there is the internal climate. So back in 82, the civil war was already raging on since 75. However, things had started to calm down. By 77, 78, most of the belligerent parties in Lebanon were already exhausted. Everybody had promises that they would, end the war within a year and everything will be better for both parties that were fighting the civil war. But none of these promises materialized. So by the 80s, they were already exhausted. The economy of the country was already in tatters. So they really, things were calming down, and it was supposed to end up, at some kind of status quo. However, in 82, Israel decided to invade Lebanon to destroy the PLO infrastructure and kick the PLO out of Lebanon. And what happened then is something very similar to what happened in Gaza during the last year. However, it just was not televised and was not documented. But the amount of destruction, the amount of murder and killing and rampage that Israel caused on Lebanon was huge. So one of the things that they did is that the PLO had huge, economic investments and infrastructure across Lebanon. It accounted for 30% of Lebanon's GDP. It was completely razed to the ground overnight during the invasion. Many people were killed, many were displaced, and in 6 days, Israel invaded Lebanon and reached Beirut and started a blockade on Beirut. And the consequence of that blockade was the exit of the PLO under U.S. auspices. So this is why they really want to try to portray this, what's happening today as something that looks like 1982, because it was an unequivocal, defeat of the resistance in 82. However, today is not the same for many reasons. One of them is that Hezbollah is not the PLO, because the PLO were Palestinians. Hezbollah is a Lebanese party. Not just a Lebanese party, it has national support. The PLO was not very much loved, by the way, in South Lebanon. So we'll recall that, yes, we know that the right-wing Christian militias hated the Palestinians, but also at the very beginning, even the Shia of the South were not too happy to have, these armed people in South Lebanon. There were already problems with them. Of course, this is not the issue today, not the case today, but back in the days, this was an issue. And then at some point, Israel decided to cement its victory by forcing the election of a Lebanese president after a successful invasion, kicking out the PLO. They wanted to get Bashir Gemayel elected. At that point, they dragged MPs from their homes in the middle of the night. They placed them in the second parliament, because the parliament of Beirut was abandoned. There was one in Babda. And they basically told them, look outside. We have our tanks, and they are aiming at the building. Either you vote for this guy, or we're bombing everything to smithereens. So
Democracy.
Exactly. Yeah. So they voted for him. And, a couple of weeks later, he was assassinated. Pure and simple, by somebody a member of the SSNP. Because, because even in defeat, the point of the resistance is that it's very difficult to defeat a resistance, because the resistance is born out of defeat. It is a bunch of people who were crazy enough to say, despite all of the odds, I reject this defeat. I'm going to keep on going despite the odds and despite everybody else around me. And this is something that makes extremely, it makes like resistance is extremely annoying to squash, because defeat is the starting point. It's not the finish line for them.
Right. I mean, it's really incredible when you think about what you just described, because now let's talk about the different. Well, you mentioned some of the differences. I mean, the differences today are Hezbollah is a Lebanese organization, not Palestinian. Therefore, it's like actually from the country, and it has a huge base of support within the country. And you can't just come in and put a gun to a bunch of heads. I mean, I guess you could try, but you would have a lot more resistance to it than you did in 1982 if you tried to appoint a president that way. Moreover, I mean, there's those differences. There's the power of Hezbollah that the Americans and Israelis got a little bit delusional about because they were high on victory from the killing of Nasrallah. But there's also other things that you mentioned too. The fact that this is the biggest force you've had up at the border from any, you said, our army and our military in modern history in the region, to have like 100,000 Israeli soldiers at the border, like waiting to invade. They still haven't really tried to invade like with their tanks the way they have in the past. So that's another difference. But I also think there's a difference in tactic, because this is a different Israel today, right? Like, I'm not saying the Israelis weren't brutal in 1982. They absolutely were. They killed like tens of thousands of people in the course of a few months, especially with the siege of Beirut. And obviously the Israelis were brutal in 2006, but there's different tactic today in the sense of, after a year of pushing the envelope in Gaza, it's like they are actively committed to going to war against not just Hezbollah and not just kind of like bombing civilians when they feel like it, but they're literally targeting medical workers. And maybe that was the case before, but not to this level. So can you talk about some of the differences in terms of the style of warfare we're seeing from the Israelis this time around? And because, I mean, we talk about how Hezbollah is a more powerful force today than they were in 2006. That is absolutely true. Israel's also a more powerful force than they were in 2006. And they have a bit of a different strategy. They had the Dahiya doctrine in 2006. I think now they have the Gaza doctrine.
Yeah. So among the many differences today, I think the biggest difference is Israel itself. So if we look back at the recent history, the last 30 years or 20 years of Israel history, you'll find a series of defeats, of very humiliating defeats. So in 2000, Hezbollah proved that Israel can be made to withdraw from territory it had conquered by liberating South Lebanon. In 2006, Hezbollah proved again that Israel can be made to withdraw its invading forces by defeating it in 2006 and forcing all the Merkavas and the people the Israeli soldiers to withdraw, and they failed with their invasion. In 2023, Hamas proved something else, that Israel can be attacked within its interior. So if you take all of these three defeats, you'll find something that is very critically important for Israel, and that is that it has lost any and all sorts of military, what's it called?
Supremacy?
Deterrence. Oh, yeah, the image of supremacy and deterrence as well. So basically today, there's a very clear message to anyone who cares to listen. If Hamas can do it, then anybody can. It's as clear as that. And Israel and all of its image, of technological supremacy and all that, it doesn't matter. So since then, since October 7th, Israel has been making a series of decisions that have led Israel on a sort of path dependence. So every time, first they were like, okay, this is it. This is like the final straw. We've been humiliated a third time. And at some point, there's a risk to the Zionist project itself. So when Israel that says that it can guarantee the security of Jews across the world, and then you have these Zionists that come into Israel and settle there, well, once you tell them and you convince all of them unequivocally that they're not safe in Israel, they will never abandon their comfortable lives in the West to move to the Middle East, where obviously everybody doesn't really like them that much. And not because they're Jews, but because they're Zionists and they're taking stuff that don't belong to them. So then they had to save the theory of the project itself through genocide. So first, October 7th happens the same day the decision to commit genocide across Gaza to teach everybody a lesson, not just Palestinians, but everybody who's watching, that this is what happens when you cross Israel. And this set a series of events that were basically unavoidable. So first, they lost the war against Hamas because after a year, Hamas's military capabilities were slightly reduced, yes, but not significantly. Nothing that comes close to the amount of destruction and thousands of tons of bombs that they have dropped. Hamas is still operational, still there. So this is even more humiliating. So when they realize that there is no military victory against Hamas and they cannot, hold Yahya Sinwar's head in front of a camera and say, look at him, we killed him, and we're still powerful, they decide to do something else. And that is that, okay, if we admit defeat now against Hamas, then the Zionist project is over. People are going to see we lost the third time, that's it, we're done. So why don't we try to provoke other conflicts so that since this conflict is going, we'll expand it and then we'll get a second shot at a victory shot. We can take this picture with somebody else, maybe with Nasrallah's head. And this is what they did. So then they expanded the conflict into Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and Iran and the West Bank, so that they can, push the narrative further. Since they cannot win, they'll pick another fight, see if they can win this one. Doesn't seem to be working either. Things are just looking even worse for Israel. So what they did, in a way, they've accelerated so much, the timeline. So all settler colonial projects are doomed to fail if you cannot exterminate the indigenous population. This is a fact. The only ones who were successful, they killed everybody. So in this timeline, Israel was set to collapse, maybe within decades, a century even. But now they've condensed this timeline exponentially. They are proving, time and time again, that they are failures at protecting anybody. They cannot control anyone, and this is what the core issue is, and this is the primary force that is driving all the events today in the region. Israel is trying tooth and nail to nail one victory, just one victory. It can claim to be like, okay, we're done, we fought, we won, we avenged, the kidnapping and the killing on October 7th, but it's not coming, because the more they pick fights with people, and it's mostly because of asymmetrical warfare. So for the past 30 years, the entire region has realized, we cannot, all the regular armies have been defeated at the hand of Israel. Let's try something else. Let's try asymmetrical warfare. And they've been building it and expanding it and improving it. And if there's anything that Nasrallah has succeeded in, it is not the fact that he's charismatic and was able to install fear in the hearts of Israel. It is the structure of Hezbollah itself. For the past 30 years, Nasrallah has perfected the structure, made it impervious to individual assassinations, and made it extremely adaptable. And this is something that we're seeing today. The consequences of this work we're seeing today.
Yeah, and before we jump into some more sort of Hezbollah stuff, I do want to quickly touch on the fears of a civil war. And these are legitimate fears. There's always a fear of a civil war in Lebanon, because it is a country that's government is set up, by sect, as you explained earlier. And recently, Netanyahu gave this ultimatum, and I'm really sorry to trigger people, but it's worth just playing part of this clip in his message from last week to the Lebanese people that, for whatever reason, was in English. But there was a specific part that stood out. I'm going to play it real quick. Here it is.
Children and grandchildren, you have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. It doesn't have to be that way. Each of you can take a step for your future, even a small step. You can make a difference. I say to you, the people of Lebanon, free your country from Hezbollah so that this war can end. Free your country from Hezbollah so that your country could prosper again, so that future generations of Lebanese and Israeli children will know neither war nor bloodshed, but will finally live together in peace.
So that is just... sorry to subject everybody to today's Hitler, which I really do think that that's an apt comparison. But he's essentially saying there, either we turn you into Gaza or you guys kill each other. He's calling for civil war there. And the reality of the situation is, the Israelis have displaced 1.2 million people, and Lebanon's a very tiny country. It's a country of less than 6 million. So a fifth of the population is currently displaced. And let's be honest about who's displaced. The Israelis have been carpet bombing Shia villages in the south, Shia areas in Beirut. Even when they've hit areas that are considered majority Christian, like Jbeil or Kisrwen, they're hitting Shia neighborhoods, or Shuaifit, which is, has a lot of Druze people in it. They're hitting Shia neighborhoods. I think yesterday was maybe one of maybe two times when they've hit a non-majority Shia area. Yesterday, we're recording this a day after they hit, the Israelis bombed a building in Zgharta, which is majority Christian, and very far north into Lebanon, but they bombed a building full of displaced people. So it was full of mostly, I think it was full of entirely Lebanese Shias displaced from Aitarun in the south. And some people saw that as a message to Sleiman Frangi, who's, in Zgharta. And that's more like internal Lebanese politics, but he's from a small Christian party that's technically aligned with Hezbollah. So not all Christians are just like on the side of the U.S. and Lebanon, just like an important thing to note. That's all to say, there does seem to be an attempt by the Israelis to ignite, foment civil strife in the midst of a catastrophic moment to try to make things more difficult for Hezbollah. So I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about that aspect of things, about the potential for civil strife, for civil war. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the longer this continues, the longer there's over 1 million displaced people, and you've got in a country that's as segregated as Lebanon, with as many cultural differences and polarization as Lebanon, when you have people from one community in another community's town or neighborhood displaced for a very long time, it can lead to civil strife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, since Israel is, in a way, a sectarian state, it is founded on a religious identity. It understands very well how to deal with sects, how to pit them against each other. And in that aspect, it does understand, Lebanon's sectarian tensions. As somebody who, since they have taken, an active part in fomenting this strife and tipping the scales whenever they see fit, they understand it pretty well. So based on this understanding, they came up with a policy. So this time around, they're gonna, carpet bomb all majority Shia neighborhoods, and then they're going to start to install fear in the hearts of all the non-Shia communities that says that if you host a displaced Shia family, we will bomb that building. They haven't done it systematically, but they've done it enough times to make people, be afraid. So, and yesterday's attack was the latest one. So from that perspective, today they are pitting, sects against each other. And today I've heard of at least 3 people that have three households of displaced people that identify as Shia that have been asked to vacate the premises that they were renting once they were displaced, because people are afraid that Israel will target these buildings. So this is something that is in a way working. However, it does not give an accurate picture of the entire image. So yes, on one hand, you have the people who are anti-Hezbollah. They are more pro-American, ambitious as well, that they see that now is the time to strike and maybe score some few points and maybe tip the scale of power into their favor. And I mean by that, the Lebanese forces and the other right-wing Christians. However, there's also a lot of people that are helping. I have never seen that many grassroots initiatives across Lebanon. Even in 2006, this was not happening. In 2006, there were some NGOs that were helping, yes, and the state was also helping a bit. That's true. But this time around, it's just people from all sects, all regions. Everybody's taking care of whatever community, the people around them, the families they know, people they do not know at all. They're cooking food. They're finding, shelter, housing. They're finding, blankets, mattresses, medicine. Doctors are volunteering their time. So there are these two aspects, but on one hand, yes, Israel is definitely pushing the agenda towards civil war, and you'll find that there are also news media outlets that are openly promoting, Israeli narrative in that regard, because they always want to promote the idea, especially the right-wing Christians. They want to say that, yes, we have we're not involved in this war. This is just Hezbollah's war, and whatever happens to us is a consequence of Hezbollah. We have no responsibility whatsoever. Which is also, insane in times of war, and especially after we've watched a whole year-long massacre unfolding on our southern border. To think, if anybody thinks that they are, this is something to be avoided, and they are not involved in this. Well, think again, because the entire world thinks it's involved. South Africa thinks itself that it is involved. What if it's the country that is right at the northern border of this, settler entity? So there is a lot of wishful thinking. It's true on both sides. However, there's also a reality, and that is that people are aware of what Israel is trying to do, and they are definitely fighting back in their own way, and not just with weapons, but also with good intentions and giving their time and their resources to help people.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important to point out. I'm impressed with all of our friends in Lebanon who are doing incredible work with a lot of grassroots initiative. And I mean, part of that too is because Lebanon has such a weak state that, even before this catastrophe, it was incapable of handling one crisis after another. And it was under